Hi guys, and welcome here to Distilling, where today we were talking about measuring cylinders. Now, it might sound a stupid thing to talk about because a measuring cylinder is a measuring cylinder. You pour some liquid into it, you measure your volume, and there you go. But there's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind when choosing a measuring cylinder. The first thing we need to keep in mind is the actual size, because depending on what we're using it for, we might need a smaller or larger measuring cylinder. Now, when it comes to measuring alcohol percentages during the distillation process, it is beneficial to have as small as possible measuring cylinder. The reason for that is when we take our cuts, when we take our busy with our hearts and we're taking our cuts in the hearts and deciding when did we getting close to the tails and so forth, it's better to do that with a small volume so that you don't get cross-contamination between the hearts and the tails. So you want to measure the smallest volume possible at every single cut or every single sample that you take during the distillation run. That's why it's beneficial to have smaller parrots and not larger parrots. But we need to make sure that our measuring cylinder is large enough that it can take the actual alcohol meter that we are using. Now, in previous videos or product videos, we've discussed alcohol meters, and I showed you that there's a whole bunch of different alcohol meters that we can use. And depending on which one we're using, we might need a larger measuring cylinder. Now, for instance, if we were to use a short stem alcohol meter, the 100 ml cylinder is more than big enough. I don't need anything bigger than a 100 ml cylinder. If, however, we use a long stem alcohol meter, you can see that this is now the long stem alcohol meter with thermometer. You can see that even if I was working with a high percentage alcohol and it stood in here, the maximum I could measure is 90%. It is physically impossible for me with a 100 ml cylinder to measure higher than 90% because otherwise it's just going to stand here. Remember, when an alcohol meter or SG meter is used, it cannot touch the bottom. If it's touching the bottom, it's just standing there. It's not measuring anything. It needs to bob. If you touch the top, it needs to bob. If it doesn't bob, it's not measuring anything. It's just standing there. So I can already see that if I'm using this type of alcohol meter, I cannot use a 100 ml cylinder unless I'm using an alembic still. The reason for that is an alembic still or pot still cannot go above 90% in any case. So if that's all that I'm using, it's fine. Even if I'm using that type of alcohol meter, I can get away with using a 100 ml cylinder. However, if I'm using an adjustable reflux column still or fractionating reflux column still, I'm going to need a larger measuring cylinder. The same is true for your long stem alcohol meter. You can see if I put that in there, again, I'm only measuring about 85% ABV. That's all that I can measure in a 100 ml cylinder using a long stem alcohol meter. I'm going to need a larger measuring cylinder in order to get my measurements. Now, very important, when you are using a larger measuring cylinder or a small one, you never drop the alcohol meter. You don't let it go and let it drop because it's glass. It's going to break. So you don't have to test that theory. I can promise you it will break. So as in previous videos, we gently lower it and let it reach the bottom. If we're using an SG hydrometer, again, you can see the size, a 100 ml cylinder will work for an SG hydrometer, so that's good. We don't need to take big samples when we are measuring our fermentations or monitoring our fermentations. A 100 ml cylinder is sufficient for a SG hydrometer, especially the triple scale SG hydrometer like this. If we're going commercial and we're using the really big and very accurate alcohol meters, then obviously we're going to need a larger measuring cylinder in order to use that. Now, last thing about measuring cylinders, a lot of people get worried or have theories about plastic measuring cylinders. Now, first and foremost, please note that all the measuring cylinders we sell, the plastic that they're made from is both alcohol resistant as well as food grade. It's not a problem. You can use it. There will be no leaching of chemicals, no flavor impact. These are fine to use. Another very important thing to keep in mind is that in alcohol production, commercial production, the same as with food production, we are not allowed to use glass measuring cylinders. The reason for that comes from health and safety and HACCP. Glass measuring cylinders are seen as a risk factor because if it were to break, and they do break, but if it breaks, that glass shatters, goes everywhere, could end up in a final product, could end up in a blending tank, could end up in a fermentation tank, depending on what I'm doing or what I'm producing, and that could lead to injury to a person that then consumes that product and gets that glass in. Hence, we are not allowed to use glass in alcohol, beverage production and food production facilities. That's why we use the plastic. It is a health and safety factor as well, and not just because it is cheap. It is safe to use, it is required to be used, so therefore you can use them with confidence and don't worry about it.